It was the mid-90s, a sunny Friday afternoon during summer break, and one of those rare and cherished days where my brother and I managed to nag our mom into driving us to Blockbuster Video. You see, our parents weren't wild about buying us new video games, not when you could just rent them for a fraction of the cost. So it was that any chance we got, my brother and I would cajole, convince, and chariz our way into the sacred edifice crowned with that nostalgia geyser-inducing blue and yellow banner. There we would make a beeline for the video game section. I would always make a small ceremonial lap around the NES rack, expecting to see some new or unplayed NES cart there, but this was always only a prelude. The real spoils were always in the Sega Genesis section. This was, after all, the section that did everything that other section didn't. Today, that old Blockbuster Video is long gone. That blue and yellow banner replaced with the blue and red logo of a Leslie's Pool Supplies. Gone too is the memory of why I picked up that little black Sega Genesis cartridge emblazoned with an armor-clad marsupial, but not gone is the impact that game had on me. Rocket Knight Adventures, the game that was Konami's entrant and champion for representative mascot. Sega has Sonic, Nintendo has Mario, but for a short window of time, Konami had Sparkster, the Rocket Knight. Greetings, I'm Old Man Zoo, and this is the symbolism of Rocket Knight Adventures. I couldn't resist putting together a little gameplay trailer to set to Rocket Knight Adventure Stage 1-2 music. If you've never played the game, then tell me what this music makes you imagine. For me, when I pretend not to know what game this song comes from, this song is what would happen if Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries and Delibes' Flower Duet had a child, but used a Sega Genesis FM synthesizer as a surrogate. And it's no wonder why the Rocket Knight Adventure soundtrack is so dang good. It was, after all, composed in part by Michiru Yamane, who would go on to write music for Castlevania Symphony of the Night. But it's not all sweeping heroic operatics. Some of it is sort of a dire whimsy a la Stage 2-2's music. Think Prokofiev's Dance of the Nights as played by a circus clown. But before I get too carried away in how much I love the eclectic music in this game, there's a few things that we need to dig into first. Unlike the first two Symbolism videos where I was covering well-traveled franchises like Castlevania and Mega Man, I realized that Rocket Knight Adventure is probably not especially well known. Just searching around for basic lore or history videos for the Rocket Knight Adventure mythos, just to see if what I'm about to talk about hasn't been done to death, I quickly realized that there really isn't much. In fact, if Konami hadn't recently released a Rocket Knight collection just a year ago as of the making of this video, there might not be much Rocket Knight content out there at all, save for a few scattered Let's Plays and the obligatory soundtrack posts. This dearth of collective knowledge about Rocket Knight means I can't rightly skirt past the history and lore section with just a few mentions of my favorite highlights. No, I think in order to build out our tree of symbolism analysis, we must first prepare the soil with the fertilizer of lore. As I've mentioned in the other Symbolism videos, I like to constrain myself to something I call game scope, which is the idea that we're only going to look at the lore and adjacent media that was contemporaneous with the game we're discussing. So things like manuals, interviews, ads, etc. that preceded or accompanied the game's release. Now, this will be a lot easier with Rocket Knight Adventures because there just isn't a ton of information, so I'm less likely to try to reach forward in time to try to cheat my way through guessing what the developer's intent was. There just really isn't that much information about this series like there is with Castlevania and Mega Man. That said, the lore behind Rocket Knight Adventures that does exist is a bit more in depth than one might initially suspect. Previously on this channel, when we reviewed the stories behind Mega Man and Castlevania, we were treated with a few brief sentences setting the stage for the game. A haunted demonic castle, a futuristic city, but with Rocket Knight, we get multiple paragraphs of lore, including an important character that never appears in the game, but whose archetypical echo can be felt in many of the brief and entertaining cutscenes the game has to offer. The manual breaks the story down into 3 sections: the past, the present, and the future. So let's start at the start. The past. The world you are about to encounter is called Elhorn. It is a world of warriors, magic, and machinery. It is also the home of the Kingdom of Zebulos. I'm just going to cut in here as I read the manual to sort of insert my own thoughts as we go. Already, we're establishing that this world is going to contain some anachronistic elements. We have warriors, we have magic, and technology. Reading this immediately reminded me of my favorite Final Fantasy game, which is Final Fantasy VI, which features an interesting blend of warriors, wizards, and machines. So already this setting has me hooked. So let's continue. Quote, Zebulos is a kingdom with a long history. Its first king was Zebulos. Now it is difficult to sort the ancient legends and myths from the facts. The prevailing belief is that Zebulos was a brave hero who fought a band of evil would-be invaders who sailed in a powerful evil ship called the Pig Star. Okay, so already we're dipping into some really fascinating melding of 2 Western pieces of history. In my opinion, Zebulos seems like a callback to another warrior leader by the name of El Cid. El Cid was a famous Castilian knight known for his incredible martial prowess and military leadership. El Cid's name comes from a borrowed Arabic honorific, as Sayyid, which essentially means the Lord or the Master. I have to admit, I went through a bit of a Crusades history mania over the last year or so it was impossible for me not to make this connection. The second piece of Western history is probably more obvious. A ship, a big giant round spherical ship called the Pig Star, which if you look at this thing, it's obviously an homage to the Death Star from Star Wars, a giant space station and a terrible superweapon. So built into the lore itself, we have a melding of ancient warriors and high technology. Let's keep reading. These invaders would have brought destruction to Zebulos and his clan. They fought hard, and though the odds were against them, Zebulos would not give up. His courage and conviction provided the leadership necessary to overcome their opponents. After defeating the invaders, Zebulos became the ruler of the peaceful land, and the Pig Star was placed under a magical seal to keep it out of enemy hands. The key to the seal was guarded by Zebulos and his royal family. We aren't given the details how, but I have my theories, which we'll get to. Zebulos manages to somehow seal away the Pig Star with magic, rendering the giant space station inert and orbiting helplessly around planet Elhorn. This heroic endeavor essentially grants Zebulos and his bloodline a royal as well as mystical mandate to rule and to defend their people. This echoes nicely with the idea that a monarch's fortunes and a monarch's destiny is directly tied to his people. The monarch succeeds when his kingdom prospers. The introduction of a mystical element gives Zebulos' bloodline an almost divine edict to rule and to protect. Let's keep going. From generation to generation, the Zebulon family has guarded the key because the Pig Star had the power to destroy whole worlds. The kingdom of Zebulos has always been subject to attack. An elite fighting force was formed, the powerful Rocket Knights. These armored warriors use rocket packs and mystical swords as well as superb fighting skills to protect and serve the kingdom. So in this paragraph, we delve into the origins and raison d'etre of the game's namesake, the Rocket Knights. I love the description here because it paints the perfect picture of a holy warrior archetype. So think back a bit to the Castlevania, which if you haven't watched it yet, you should, where we talk about Simon Belmont being a holy warrior. He's a martially trained fighter that wields a mystical weapon. And what do we have here? A group of martially trained fighters with, as the manual states, mystical swords, a mystic weapon, right? So now I think a key difference between the archetype Simon Belmont embodies versus the one our team of Rocket Knights embody lies in their vestments. Simon is clad in leather. He resembles a wild northern barbarian, whereas the Rocket Knights are, quote, armored warriors. So what's a better name for a holy armored knight? a paladin.
For the king.
The difference might seem minor at first glance between the archetype of holy warrior and paladin, but I think paladins are upholding a divinely inspired code, whereas a warrior is more likely to zealously pursue and crush the enemies of God. Belmont will have righteous fury. The Rocket Knights will protect and uphold the law within the constraints of an order. So let's read the last paragraph of this section, the past section. Quote, "The current leader of the Rocket Knights is the brave Sparkster. He emerged as leader when the Rocket Knight Master Mifune Senjulo was destroyed by a corrupt knight called Axel Gear. Sparkster fought Axel Gear and banished him from the land, but there are rumors that Axel Gear has returned to the kingdom." Okay, there's the mention of, in my opinion, a very important figure in the lore that we never actually see in any of the Rocket Knight games, Mifune Senjulo. Mifune serves as the leader and mentor figure who is, according to this section of the manual, destroyed. Now, as we dive further into the manual, we'll see that Mifune's fate is a bit ambiguous, but we'll revisit that. So what's key here is that we have a mentor figure who gets destroyed in some way, which gives our hero Sparkster the motivation to avenge his master, as well as take up the mantle of leadership. And all this character development happens before we even plug the game into the console. We establish a holy paladin and a black knight. Just like in Castlevania, the black knight archetype represents a warrior that promotes and/or commits evil. However, instead of the black knight serving a corrupt lord, Axel Gear serves only himself. We'll talk more about Axel a little later on. Let's move on to the next section of the story, the present. The kingdom has recently come under attack from the nearby Devotendos Empire. Overwhelmed by the robot-led army's attack, the Zebulon forces are nearly wiped out. The Zebulon Empire is on the verge of crumbling. Sparkster feels the presence of Axel Gear behind the attack and heads to the Castle Zebulon. Sure enough, Axel Gear has taken the princess. He plans to use her as a hostage to blackmail the king and get the key to the seal. But he doesn't realize that the princess is actually the only one left who knows of the location of the key. So this is the setting for the game laid out. Sparkster, as head of the Rocket Knights, has a duty to protect the kingdom, and he has a feeling that Axel Gear is somehow involved in the invasion. When we start the game, we'll see a sort of manifestation of Sparkster's hunch about the invasion, but we'll get to that. Also, important to note here is the introduction of the princess. This princess has secret knowledge about the magic key that binds the evil Pigstar. This is the establishment of yet another old archetype, the archetype of the mystic woman. Sometimes we call these women oracles or witches or sorceresses or even just a maiden that is in touch with the divine, which I think probably more accurately describes our princess here. Again, we'll talk more about the princess soon and her symbolic role in all of this. Let's read the final section of the story. The future. Quote, "There isn't going to be a future if Sparkster doesn't rescue the princess from Axel Gear. It is that simple. He must crush the Devotendos army and finally end Axel Gear's threat before the key is recovered and the Pigstar is reactivated. The fate of Zebulos is in your hands. You control Sparkster. Are you hero enough to face the challenge of a lifetime?" So the final section of the story is more an edict issued by the game itself to invite the player, to invite us, to take up the mystic sword, to crush evil and to rescue the princess. Think of how many stories, how many games lay out a similar mandate. We've reviewed the story as stated in the manual, and if we flip a few pages, we get to a section in the manual that lists some major characters and a few factoids. And here's where we get into some ambiguity and contradiction within the manual itself. For example, under Sparkster's entry, the manual states, quote, "A war orphan, he was taken into the house of Mifune Senjulo, a descendant of a long line of Rocket Knights. There, Sparkster was raised as a Rocket Knight. 10 years back, his master Mifune was permanently disabled by the Black Knight Axel Gear." So earlier in the manual, it was stated that Axel destroyed Mifune, which I took to mean killed Mifune. But here it says Mifune was disabled. So there's a chance Mifune actually survived the attack. The contradiction continues. Sparkster arrived in the kingdom of Zebulos after searching all over for Axel Gear, upon whom he seeks revenge. He poses as a wandering outlaw, but is in fact a strong defender of justice. That passage seems to insinuate that Sparkster did not actually banish Axel, and that Axelgear instead escaped or fled to the kingdom of Zebulos. Also strange is that earlier it stated that the Rocket Knights are defenders of the kingdom of Zebulos, but this passage makes it sound like the Rocket Knights are based somewhere outside the kingdom, and Sparkster, who is supposed to be the leader, must pose as an outlaw while entering the kingdom. That's like claiming your chief of police has to pretend to be a criminal in order to hunt another criminal. It's a very strange mismatch between Sparkster's entry and the general lore laid out earlier. My thinking is that there's some missing storyline here that was meant to express that the Order of the Rocket Knights were somehow disgraced when Axelgear attacked Mifune and stole important Order secrets. More on that in a bit. And Sparkster now has to act in an unofficial capacity to bring Axelgear to justice and restore honor to both his mentor Mifune as well as the Rocket Knights. Moving on to the next character entry, we find King Zebulos, who is the current monarch of the Kingdom of Zebulos. The manual states that he is loved by the people for his tolerant and fair rule. Also important to note that it says in his youth he was buddies with Mifune, which was Sparkster's teacher, and went on numerous adventures with him. That's a great bit of world building. If King Zebulos is hanging out with the leader of elite knights, and the king is a descendant of the warrior king Elzebulos, I think it's safe to say that the king himself is, or at least was, a formidable warrior in his own right. It's probably not a surprise to you that I'm a fan of the old man archetype, and both King Zebulos and Mifune fit that archetype well. They're experienced warriors endeavoring to pass on ancient knowledge, ancient and sacred memes worth preserving, mystic know-how worth conserving. We'll get to see the resourcefulness of King Zebulos later on. Next we have Princess Sherry. The manual states she is a very kind and proper daughter, but slightly naive, because she stands to inherit the key to the seal. She is the target of the attack and kidnapped by the Devotendos Imperial Army. We'll go more in depth with the archetypal significance of Princess Sherry later in the video, but just keep in mind the idea that the seal to the pig star is mystical in nature and that the princess stands to inherit this mystical burden, which suggests that she has the capacity to interact with the supernatural aspects of the world of Elhorn. Now we get into the bad guys of the game, starting with Axelgear, the Black Knight. When Axelgear is first mentioned in the manual, I assumed he was a Rocket Knight that attempted to take control of the Rocket Knights, but failed and was banished. But going back and reading the initial story in the manual and comparing it to his character entry, we get a slightly different story. The manual states, quote, "The Black Knights are a band of Rocket Knights who have gone bad. Power and greed corrupted them. Axelgear once tried to steal an ancient book that contained the secret of the Rocket Knights. The book was kept by Mifune, who Axelgear wounded severely." So here we get this picture of a group of Rocket Knights who essentially became dirty, abusing their position of power to take advantage of the kingdom. At some point, Axel joined this band and attempted to steal forbidden knowledge from his former master. There's some very strong biblical allegory here. The book could be the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Mifune could be the Heavenly Father. And Axelgear could be the Eve that fell to temptation, and due to his sin against his father, he is cast out, or perhaps flees, much like Adam flees from God in shame. But Axel's fall is not complete. He instead lends his elite martial talents to an enemy, Emperor Devilgus. An interesting note is that Axel seems to always be seeking power. Check this out. The manual says Axelgear secretly loathes the ugly Devilgus and is always looking for a chance to overthrow him and take control. So not only does Axelgear literally flee from his father, but he goes on to serve an emperor with the word devil in his name. But it's not enough to simply serve the devil, he wants to rule in hell. Speaking of the devil, the next entry is for Emperor Devilgus Devotendos. The manual tells us he built the powerful army of the revived Devotendos Empire. Versed in archaeology, he dug up and revived robots from the ruins of the old empire. With his powers of hypnosis, he controls crowds and oppresses neighboring countries. So Devilgus is this mysterious and new leader that managed to spontaneously rise to power and take advantage of a presumably fallen empire. From this description, we get the idea that Devilgus is also tapped into some sort of mystic power, or at the very least, proficient in high technology of some kind that allows him to essentially enslave an entire nation under his hypnotic will. Even though the manual states his ultimate goals remain unclear, we can at least surmise as the player that he wants to gain control of the Big Star since he's seeking a way to remove the seal placed upon it. Our final entrant is Captain Fleagle, who appears to be, at least from what I can gather, a willing collaborator for the Devilgus regime. He is described in the manual as the bad boy of the local aristocrats. He became captain of the Empire's great flying battleship, the Big Baroni. The manual also says he is a clumsy oaf who never seems to get things right. We'll see how this characterization of Fleagle plays out, but he symbolizes the corrupted noble archetype and appears to occupy a position of power not due to some great competence, but because his corrupted nature likely enabled Devilgus in some function of taking over the Devotindos Empire. Well, that covers the story, major characters and some of the archetypal implications at play. Let's charge up our rocket packs and dodge forward into some gameplay. And don't worry, we'll come back and talk about some more of the history behind the game a little later on. If you're a fan of adventure, fantasy, or just mythology in general, you've likely heard of a narrative archetype called the hero's journey. You might have even seen this diagram that highlights the narrative beats involved in the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell is largely credited with developing the idea of the monomyth, a singular story from which all other stories can be derived from. As I was reading up on Joseph Campbell's idea, I found a lot of my own thoughts about video games often intersecting with his, mainly about the synthesis of story creation, and that the stories that stick with us, that really seem to ring true, that make a true impact on our souls, are impactful because they carry a sacred meaning, or to update Campbell's parlance, a sacred meme. The holy warrior is Constantine the Great, is Simon Belmont. The reluctant peacekeeper is William Marshall, is Mega Man. And the noble knight is El Cid, is Sparkster. The echoes of our heroic fathers resonate in our brains when we read about their conquests, their achievements, their victories, and their defeats. Their memes shape your mind just as much as your genes predict your height. The hero's journey is a useful tool to help break down why a certain story might resonate particularly well, and while Rocket Knight Adventures does not hit all 17 phases of Joseph Campbell's original layout for the hero's journey, I think it hits enough points that I want to try to map the game to this time-tested and well-loved blueprint for meme transmission. To aid that endeavor, I'll be using a simplified take on the hero's journey, starting with the call to adventure. Sparkster stands on a narrow precipice. In the background, we can make out the distant castle, the Castle Zebulon. Sparkster's face lacks its usual cheerfulness. The sky is an unnatural hue of black and red, and a mist shrouds the rest of the kingdom. Something is wrong. Sparkster brandishes his mystic sword. The camera rotates around him in an impressive technological display for a game developed in 1993 for the Sega Genesis. We now see what Sparkster sees. A vision of the devil, Emperor Devilgus to be exact. The evil emperor's twisted, grinning visage hovers menacingly over the tranquil and orderly kingdom of Zebulos. Whether the emperor is actually manifesting himself before the kingdom, or if we're simply witnessing Sparkster's premonition of the invasion, both serve as Sparkster's call to adventure, or perhaps more appropriately, his call to action. You see, Sparkster came here to track down a traitor to his heroic order of Rocket Knights, but he didn't expect to intercept an invasion of the Devotindos Empire. The first step of the hero's journey is the call to adventure, and it's this call that is answered in the first stage of Rocket Knight. And our adventure is heralded by heroic fanfare. Get used to this fanfare because I love it and I'm going to abuse it from here on out. The call to adventure is often characterized as an event that pulls the hero into the unknown. Here, Sparkster is called by his sense of duty to protect his kingdom and to hunt down the traitor Axel Gear. We start our adventure in the rolling hills of the kingdom of Zebulos, and already we face a scene of chaos. In the background, we see the castle in flames with some sort of robotic weapon sieging the upper parapets. Without uttering a single word or reading a single line of dialogue, the situation is laid bare. Sparkster must get to the castle. But it's not so simple. He takes a few steps towards a burning house and is ambushed by a pair of pig soldiers. The pig as a negative symbol characterizes greed, filth, deviousness. In fact, the pig snout is a ubiquitous motif for the Devotendos Empire. What's more, armor is a symbol of the military. It's a symbol of power, defense, and protection. In this context, these are armored pigs, militarized greed. The manual states the citizens of the Devotendos Empire were hypnotized, but the symbolism hints that maybe the citizens weren't that hard to convince, and that maybe greed is inherent to their nature. Another interesting note about the pig soldiers' armor is that their hat resembles a Turkish chichek helmet, and they're wielding curved scimitar swords. Compare that to the more European design of both Sparkster's blue armor and arming sword, and we get an even clearer symbolic picture that the kingdom of Zebulos is being invaded by a truly foreign power and not just some neighboring kingdom. Also notice the technological disparity between the two kingdoms. The Zebulons rely on rocket packs and magic, but the Devotendosians make use of a wide variety of industrial-era weapons, machinery, robots, and more. In fact, just a few steps in, and Sparkster's nearly run down by a jalopy filled with pig soldiers looking to crush our hero under tread. Fortunately, we can make use of the dual nature of Sparkster's sword. Striking enemies appears to briefly toggle off their hitbox, which essentially gives Sparkster a few precious frames of invincibility to evade attacks that would otherwise harm him. As an aside, something I never really thought about until I started reviewing my gameplay footage was that the tires of the vehicle actually track with the terrain. There's all sorts of really neat stylistic details in the game. Sparkster continues his trek towards the castle until we are impeded by some tricky terrain. This is the part of the game that demands that we learn how to use Sparkster's rocket pack, and so charging it up, Sparkster is able to propel himself up and over obstacles, even scaling the side of a sheer cliff face. It's here the camera ominously pans and locks into position. It's quiet, too quiet. Another ambush. This time the pig soldiers are clad in red armor. Unlike the synthetic corrupted AI green from Mega Man or the toxic poisonous rotten greens of Castlevania, the green pig armor I think represents a type of rank within the Devotendos army. The green soldiers are the rank and file, but the crimson armor represents an elite corps within the army. As we know from previous symbolism videos, red represents violence, malice, and danger. These four cloaked soldiers,
too late, Snake! Now die!
Camouflage perfectly before attacking. They don't charge Sparkster head-on, they instead leap up in the air with an expert agility. But our hero is an elite warrior himself, or a possum is a pro. After he dispatches this elite squad, Sparkster begins to cross a flimsy bridge that spans a roaring waterfall. But before he can get too far, we encounter an enemy driving a tank, the pig tank.
This is Raven's territory.
I think at this point the only thing missing from Sparkster is the bandana. Notice the tank is adorned with the standard motif of the Devotendos Empire. It's the pig snout and even some pig tusks for good measure. But that snout isn't just for show. When this tank isn't lobbing iron cannonballs, the snout acts as a mid-range flamethrower. Tanks share some symbolism with armor in that they can represent power, military might, and military technology. If we focus on the negative symbolism tanks can symbolize, which is that of oppressive authority, something that crushes resistance, something that invades. Another detail I never really noticed before is the tank fires cannonballs, but this tank has an ejector that is clearly ejecting tank shells. So perhaps these cannonballs are actually a proper artillery round that is designed to bounce around and clear out enemy personnel. In any event, Sparkster spots the tank's weakness and uses his jetpack to maneuver behind the enemy. The soldier is unable to turn the tank around on this narrow bridge and is unable to stop Sparkster's counterattack. The tank explodes, but not before taking the bridge with it. Sparkster is somehow able to maneuver on the rushing current of the massive waterfalls. The top half of the pig tank comes careening down with him. The driver no longer has any control as the turrets spin wildly around the stage. It's all Sparkster can do to deflect the tank's wild trajectory with his mystic blade. They fall for what seems like forever, but this fall doesn't serve the psychological purpose that narrative falls typically do. No, that comes later. This fall simply sets us up for the next section of Stage 1. Sparkster lands on a small island, while the debris of the destroyed pig tank lands all around him on the vast lake surrounding Castle Zebulon. Kind of crazy that this is still just the first stage. Lying on the small bank of the island is a rare power-up, in fact the only one of its kind in the entire game, the Power Pack. Was this a component from the pig tank? The blue-rimmed glass capsule appears to contain a pulsating orange energy. Remember, from Mega Man, orange can represent power and energy, and that blue color we've seen, that blue prevalently displayed on Mega Man as well. Sparkster picks up the Power Pack and inserts it into his back-mounted rocket and immediately launches into the air to a fanfare of wonder. Lakes and large bodies of water in general represent the unknown, or the subconscious. The hero's journey is often divided between the world the hero knows and the world the hero doesn't. Make note here that Sparkster flies above the water. In fact, entering the water causes Sparkster to lose speed. He's punished at this point for delving into the unknown. He's not ready, not yet. He has a kingdom to save, no time to search the subconscious realm. It isn't long before Sparkster runs into countermeasures, no doubt deployed by the Devotendos Empire to slow him down. Strange robotic shrimp held aloft by the signature enemy symbol, a pig-faced balloon. Shrimp are denizens of the deep sea. They crawl around in the darkness. The sea is the subconscious, and the shrimp are the thoughts that scavenge in that environment. But our hero bats these subaquatic creatures away with ease as he races towards the castle. Also, again, gotta point out a great detail. This one I noticed even as a kid. See the wake created by Sparkster when you fly low to the surface of the water, and even the enemies when you attack them and they careen into the lake. That's such a nice detail. Speaking of aquatic creatures, the robot shrimp aren't the only Devotendosian robot lurking in the lake. As we close in on the castle, a large robotic serpent, complete with fish fins for ears, swims furiously after our hero. Serpents are man's ancient enemy, ever since Lucifer took on the guise of one and tempted man to his downfall. Similar to Lucifer, this snake swims with ease through the lake, through the subconscious realm of chaos and the unknown, and seeks to leap out and drag our hero into the depths. It might be at this point in the game that we discover that if you get really close to an enemy, you can strike him not just with the mystical projectile the sword emits, but also the sword itself. It seems the magic of Sparkster's sword is even more potent when administered directly. Just as St. Patrick drove out the snakes, drove out the wicked pagans with his holy staff, so too does Sparkster drive away this serpent, destroying its body and casting its remains to the sea. And then we arrive at Castle Zebulon with a bang. The scene is chaotic. The ancient walls are on fire. The citizens are in a panic. The throne room is under siege. Our hero doesn't hesitate as he navigates the crumbling castle corridors, dispatching pig soldiers that have wandered too close to the flames. As Sparkster jets up to the second floor, a conflagration erupts behind him. As a kid, I assumed that this was meant to represent a backdraft, like parts of the castle have collapsed, which causes an infusion of oxygen, which just happens to reach the area that Sparkster is traveling through, and you have to dodge this unstable wall of fire as you flee upwards. But I think one could also make the case that this is some sort of firebomb or weapon that's being used on the castle itself. Oddly enough, there's this section of the game where there's a large wrapped gift box, and Sparkster shares our confusion. Why is this here? I speculate that maybe this was part of the Empire's plan to invade the castle. Maybe there was a host of these boxes delivered to the castle, and they served as a series of Trojan horses to infiltrate and destabilize the internal defenses of the castle. And somehow the pig soldier hiding inside misses his cue and doesn't erupt until Sparkster gets too close. In any event, Our hero makes short work of the incompetent soldier. As we approach the throne room, we can see the strange, gigantic centipede-like siege weapon hovering around the castle. The very same weapon we spotted at the start of Stage 1. Note the telltale pig snout affixed to the centipede, clearly marking it as property of the Devotendos Empire. Sparkster arrives at the throne room. I just wanted to take a second to look at the crest on the wall though. This crest looks like the combination of several different symbols, so let's break them apart. The most obvious one is the Latin cross that comprises the bulk of the crest. I think in this context, this indicates that the kingdom of Zebulos adheres to a moral code or perhaps follows a divinely inspired moral authority, which I think meshes well with the established lore that the line of El Zebulos is attached to a righteous destiny to drive out evil and defend the seal that subdues corruption. Then we have what looks like an anchor, or maybe even two anchors, or perhaps an anchor and a fishhook. The anchor has a strong connection to nautical, seafaring people, and given that Castle Zebulon was built in the middle of a massive lake, it's not a stretch to think that the Zebulons have an economy that is centered around fruit and fishing. More on fruit in a bit. Finally, there appears to be a cane or a staff with a blue gem affixed to it. I think this represents magic or mystical power, which also ties into the mystical connection the kings of Zebulos have with the supernatural, and more specifically with the upkeep and maintenance of the magic seal that contains the evil pig star. In short, the crest is a symbol representing a divinely chosen bloodline that is gifted with mystic powers and perhaps engages or owes a part of its heritage to some sort of nautical tradition. Okay, back to the fight. The robotic centipede uses its siege capabilities to break holes through the ceiling and walls, then proceeds to dump little blue probes into the throne room to flush out our hero. Sparkster carefully dodges the probes and destroys the red master probe that luckily deactivates its blue children. Centipedes can be venomous, and in Japan, there's a myth around a giant centipede called the Omukade that lives in mountains and caves. These are aggressive, warlike demons, so it's no wonder we see this giant robotic centipede, an avatar of war, besieging the castle, seeking to destroy our hero. But Sparkster destroyed the serpent, and so too does he destroy the demonic centipede. Sparkster races out of the throne room towards the commotion he hears just outside on a balcony. It's Axel Gear with the princess in tow, the traitor he's been searching for, the one who crippled Master Mifune Sangelo, stole the secrets of the Rocket Knights, and disgraced the knighthood. But that's not all. King Zebulos himself is here, calling for aid, but Axel cruelly kicks him aside. Sparkster slowly approaches, but he's helpless to stop Axel as long as he has the princess hostage. Then Axel leaps off the edge, landing on the waiting airship hovering just below. Sparkster attempts to board as well, but is cast off the side of the balcony from the power of the airship's thrusters. Our hero tumbles into the unknown, ending both the call to adventure phase of his journey as well as Stage 1. Rocket Knight Adventures was directed by Nobuya Nakazato, who just a few years before had completed work on Contra 3, The Alien Wars for the Super Nintendo, and a few years before that, Castlevania The Adventure for the Game Boy. And he would go on to be involved in a lot more. Nakazato is one of those guys that probably worked on all of your favorite Konami franchises. He worked on the design for Castlevania Symphony of the Night and Vandal Hearts. He aided in production of Castlevania The Dracula X Chronicles. He even did some QA work for Metal Gear Solid 5. However, he's probably most well known for being the Contra guy. He was involved in the design and production of the Contra series ever since the early 90s. In one of the few interviews I could find with Nakazato, he talks about another developer talks with another developer about game design philosophy, specifically with his approach to Contra. There he talks about the creation of cool situations in a 2D environment for the player to contend with. It's interesting then that Nakazato picked a Western setting not just for Contra, but for Rocket Knight Adventures to serve as the foundation to build up cool situations to happen in. Rocket Knight Adventures was released in August 1993, and one thing I wanted to point out was a few of the regional differences between the international, or what you might refer to as the North American version, and the Japanese version of the game. Check out the Japanese intro. and now the familiar international intro we saw earlier. The Japanese intro has the same menacing visage of Emperor Devilgus, but this time shows the direct invasion of the kingdom of Zebulos as pig soldiers charge into frame, shattering the peaceful scene. Personally, I think the international intro is way better and a lot more technically impressive. Being able to emulate a 180-degree camera spin with a big detailed sprite of Sparkster adds a nice cinematic flair. There's also one other major difference between the two versions, the stage fanfare. The international version features Sparkster in various action poses, but the Japanese version gets a full orchestra complete with conductor playing in each new stage. I really like these stage cards, and I wish we could have seen a version of Sparkster where we have the international intro combined with the Japanese stage cards. That would be, in my opinion, the pristine Rockignite experience. Also note that in these stage cards, they have this intricate golden filigree that incorporates swords that I think are meant to represent the mystic blades used by the Rockignite Order, as well as the same shade of blue as Sparkster's armor. We'll delve more into Sparkster's armor and the symbolic significance soon, but enough history. Let's find out what became of our hero. Sparkster falls down the side of the castle and into the vast lake below. We can presume at some point off-screen he used his rocket pack to control the descent of his wild tumble so that the impact with the surface tension of the water doesn't break every opossum bone in his opossum body. He survives the fall, but he failed. Failed to stop Axel, failed to rescue Princess Sherry, and now with each passing second, the Devotendos airship gets further and further away. With no power pack in sight, Sparkster can't simply zoom over the surface of the water like he did last time. As he moves forward, we encounter another of the named entries in the manual. It is called the Repulsive Raccoon Robot, piloted by a pig soldier. The negative symbolism behind raccoons, especially a repulsive raccoon, is that of deception. They're scavengers digging through waste, and this robotic scavenger perhaps digging through the rubble of the crumbling Castle Zebulon above in search of royal spoils, just happens to come across our hero. But I think this robot serves another purpose. We said earlier that the lake represented the border between the known and the unknown, the conscious and the subconscious, and it's appropriate, I think, that this also serves as the transition in the hero's journey from the call to adventure to the beginning of the next phase, which we'll refer to as the descent and the trials. Sparkster literally falls, but also figuratively falls into a place of tribulation, and before him stands a robot guardian, the first of many trials he must overcome as he traverses the depths of the unknown. Sparkster swims forward only to encounter a base of a large waterfall washing over a twist of brambles and burrs. It's in this wild and untamed thicket that we encounter another unique enemy. It's a robotic owl. In the West, owls are commonly associated with wisdom, but in the East, and in Japan in particular, owls are associated with isolation and bad luck. It seems fitting that we only run into this enemy way out in the wilderness areas of Zebulon. A little deeper, and we encounter yet another robotic mini-boss I've coined simply as the Robot Worm. This seems to be another of the many Devotendosian robots patrolling the outskirts of the invasion area, perhaps searching for spoils much like the raccoon, or perhaps this one is meant to drag down any survivors that might be looking to cross out of the borders of the kingdom of Zebulon. In any event, this worm phases between the foreground and background, erupting from the protective curtain of the waterfall to attack Sparkster. But our hero was trained by the best and strikes the robot's weak point, its tail. There's an interesting bit of mythos when it comes to monsters and their tails. In Japanese mythology, some spirits can have their influence and wisdom measured by the number of tails they possess. Perhaps the most famous example is the kitsune, where the more tails they have, the more powerful they are. The popular shonen anime Naruto makes full use of this old Japanese trope surrounding tailed beasts. However, this center of spiritual energy can also serve as a center of vulnerability, and there are countless Japanese video games that also use this trope, from Zelda and Dark Souls to Rocket Knight Adventures. Severing the tail of the worm destroys the evil robot and allows us to travel deeper into the wilderness. And at the edge of the wilderness, we come across an all too familiar symbol. If you've watched any of my other symbolism videos, you'll already know this one: the cave. Oh yes, the cave, and its meaning goes double in the hero's journey. Caves are a symbolic opening to hell, and this cave in particular is flooded with water. So now we have an environment where our hero must dive even deeper into the unknown, deeper into hell, in order to fulfill his duty. The second section of this cave in particular reminds me a lot of the movie Hellraiser. If you're unfamiliar with the franchise, there's this motif, this idea in the movie, especially in the first movie, where the introduction of the agents of chaos, the Cenobites, are heralded by a clanging of dangling hooks on chains. Now, of course, I didn't make that connection as a kid, but rewatching my footage and associating Sparkster's journey through the cave system with hell, the comparison in my old man brain was probably inevitable. Traversing through the dangling spikes, we emerge from both the lake and the cave, only to be met with a vast mountain range and what appears to be an abandoned mining facility. I like to think that this was a facility that was used by the neighboring kingdom to Zebulon. Initially I thought that maybe this was an old Devotendosian facility, but the manual, as well as the symbolism, makes it clear that the pigs come from a kingdom much further away. And it could be just as likely that this was a Zebulon facility at one point in time. Due to the dilapidated and broken nature of the track, it seems this area hasn't seen proper use in a long time. But that doesn't stop the pig soldiers from pursuing our hero in their own minecarts as we make our way through the desolate mountain range. As Sparkster careens down the minecart track, his path takes him through a barn filled with chickens. One of them sticks around briefly before we reach another cave, another portal to hell. Our hero is under attack again, this time by a train equipped with heavy weapons. Note the small pig snout mounted just beneath the robotic eyes of the train, marking this as yet another Devotendos weapon. Sparkster makes good use of the additional damage his close-range attacks can do by getting into point-blank range of the cannon and hacking away at it with his sword's mystic might until the tank gun explodes. But the train isn't finished yet. The track splits into upper and lower sections. The train reappears, grabbing at our hero with robotic claws. But again, Sparkster's sword serves as a great defensive weapon, granting us precious iframes with each landed attack. Trains are machines of fate. They are bound to a track and travel in a single direction. It takes a great amount of sustained force to stop a train, just as it might take one a great amount of effort to defy one's faith or change one's trajectory in life. A train, much like a tank, can represent progress, industrialization, efficiency, and since this train is heavily militarized, I think it makes a good physical representation of the ambitions of the Devotendos Empire. Once the train's claws are destroyed, it makes one final push to stop Sparkster, lobbing balls of plasma energy out of the back of its damaged frame. But a few well-placed strikes against the exposed core causes the train to explode, bringing stage 2 to an end. With no cutscene, we rejoin Sparkster deeper in the cave, deeper into the depths. This time, we're met with a reflective, undulating lake of lava while crossing a crystalline cavern. Or perhaps this isn't lava at all, but a type of volcanically infused soda lake, which can be found in nature, such as Lake Natron up in the northern parts of Tanzania. As a kid, I definitely thought this was some weird reflective lava, but after consuming years of random YouTube videos, I remember watching one about caustic soda lakes, so that one just came to mind. But natural phenomenon aside, symbolically, this red lake is very much like other dangerous red symbolism we found throughout video gamedom. The water aspect still represents the subconscious, but the red aspect infuses the water with danger, violence, and malevolence. A single touch is instant death. Navigating past the soda lake, Sparkster enters into what appears like a man-made, or should I say pig-made, structure, complete with robotic guardfish and a spiked barricade. Our hero is crossing yet another foreign boundary. From a lore perspective, this could be the distant boundary into the Devotendos Empire, but the symbols mark this as yet another threshold in our hero's journey. We're delving deeper into the unknown. The answers lie at the bottom of the abyss, but the abyss is guarded by creatures of the subterranean, creatures of the subconscious. And what better creature to represent the subterranean and the subconscious than a bottom-dwelling crab. However, this crab takes the form of a giant robot piloted by yet another pig soldier. One can choose to strike the crab directly, but to play it safe, Sparkster destroys the crab's arms one by one, ensuring he can strike at the cockpit unimpeded. With some rocket-powered thrusts, the crab loses its footing and is forced back into the murky depths, revealing a broken shutter for our hero to proceed through. This last stretch of Stage 3 is interesting. It's an underground forest surrounded by lava. It's like the gloomy trees themselves are feeding off the heat from the molten rock and the fumes from the volcanic churn. It's also little wonder that as Sparkster commandeers a piece of Devotendo's tech, this won't be the last time he does this, to cross the fiery pit, that he runs into a few more robotic owls. Is this more bad fortune headed our way? Have we reached the end of our trials? It's kind of interesting that you have this underground forest symbolism kind of deep in hell. It's sort of it makes me think of a sort of twisted, corrupted nature motif, or the symbolism of what the chaotic but unfettered nature of a forest, but it's in hell, so it's a hell forest. So it's nature corrupted to an evil degree. The music shifts, something stirs in the molten pool. A great robotic fish. With little warning, the behemoth begins eating the very platform Sparkster is standing on. But luckily, our hero is fleet-footed as he carefully navigates the shifting platforms. It's all Sparkster can do to keep from being consumed by this robotic creature of the depths. In the hero's journey, there's a particular phase called the belly of the whale. For those familiar with the Bible, the story of Jonah and the whale might come to mind. Jonah attempts to avoid his duties and is subsequently swallowed by a great fish. While imprisoned in the depths, Jonah submits himself to God's will and is subsequently released from the belly of the whale and deposited safely on dry land. The central idea behind the belly of the whale phase is that the hero faces a difficult trial, submits himself to the rigors of that trial, and then ideally completes the trial having become stronger for it. Our hero Sparkster literally fights the pig soldier who leaps from the belly of a robotic whale. Note that this pilot wears the elite red armor we spotted earlier in the game. Defeating the great fish at the bottom of the cave, our hero completes Stage 3 and completes this phase of his journey. But what does he find at the bottom of the abyss? Before we continue on our journey, let's briefly review Sparkster himself. We talked about Sparkster's European-inspired suit of armor, but I wanted to draw attention to that striking blue color. If you've watched my set of Mega Man videos, you'll know that this shade of blue is often tied to the ideas of peace and justice. And I think that meaning slots well with Sparkster's character. He's the leader of a group of knights, and as stated in the manual, these knights are tasked with defending the kingdom of Zebulos, which is itself a righteous kingdom founded by a bloodline of divine warrior kings. Sparkster represents the noble, duty-bound warrior. He doesn't seem to be reluctant to violence like Mega Man, nor does he seem to have a zealous attitude towards vanquishing evil like Simon Belmont. He's bound by duty to his order and loyalty to the master and father figure who rescued, raised, and trained him. Speaking of father figures, let's get back to our hero's journey. There's another phase included in the hero's journey referred to as Atonement with the Father, or Atonement with the Abyss, in which the hero is granted some glimpse into the divine plan of the universe. To a lesser dramatic degree, this glimpse could be gaining some understanding of the evil he must face, or the wrong he must right, the answer to some confounding problem. In the case of Rocket Knight Adventures, I think this phase is represented when we have King Zebulos, father to the princess, show up outside the cave, dragging the answer to Sparkster's problem. You see, when Sparkster emerges from the cave, he sees the airship far into the distance, but has no means to get there. Somehow, our crafty, experienced old man King managed to not only bypass all the obstacles Sparkster had to contend with, but he managed to do so while dragging a gigantic wagon-mounted cannon behind him. The father is literally the father of the princess. The atonement, or in this case, the answer to the problem, is a big old cannon. The old wise king, likely a warrior himself, knew what Sparkster was going to need and rewards our hero's completion of the trials with a means of rocketing into the next phase of the hero's journey, the return. The return, at least in Rocket Knight Adventure, happens in two distinct ways, and we'll go over them as they come. The first return, in my opinion, is Sparkster's return to duty. He was cast into the abyss. He survives his trials. Now he's back on track. He explodes through the hull of the great Devotendosian airship, the Big Barone. It is here we have our first encounter with the corrupt noble Captain Flegel, temporarily disguised as Princess Sherry, seemingly only to taunt Sparkster. From behind the safety of a force field, Flegel tosses bombs, but it's nothing our hero can't handle, who simply reflects the bombs right back at him, forcing a retreat. It's also kind of funny that every time you defeat Flegel, you're treated with the familiar shave and a haircut, 2 bits theme. I have no idea why that's used here. Maybe it's meant to serve up the idea that Flegel isn't a serious threat. I'd be very interested to hear any theories about why this particular theme is used here. Anyway, as Sparkster chases Flegel around the exterior of the ship, we can see Axel and Sherry secured inside the cockpit of the Big Barone. But before he can mount a rescue, the pig-shaped nose piece of the airship is suddenly jettisoned. No doubt, Axel's doing. Sparkster leaps from the falling chunk of ship and resumes scaling the underside of the hull before encountering a flame-throwing drone. The only way to damage this enemy is by knocking a series of automated bombs onto the top of the drone's rotor, which ignites and explodes the flamethrower nozzle. As a kid, I always thought it was interesting that the airship had these countermeasures in place to stop would-be infiltrators from climbing around on the exterior. It makes me think that maybe this airship was engaged in battles with rocket knights in the past. Sparkster carefully re-infiltrates the interior of the ship, navigating a hallway of force fields while fending off a series of bazooka-wielding pig soldiers. An interesting note here, these soldiers are dressed in what can only be described as sailor attire, which seems appropriate given they're operating an airship. Also, I can't help but wonder if the pig soldiers frantically pedaling what appears to be a series of generators in the top section of the ship are just powering the hallway force fields, or if they're actually powering the entire ship. Forcing his way past the crew, Sparkster catches up to Flegel. The captain is beaten and bruised after his repeated failings, and now he's mad. As Sparkster approaches the captain, the upper hull of the ship gives way and a gigantic Flegel-shaped robot crashes through the hull. With a few test poses, Flegel demonstrates that he controls the heavily armored Flegel bot like a puppet. I think the Flegel bot is meant to represent Flegel's high opinion of himself, tall, strong, invincible. No doubt Flegel commissioned this powerful tool as a grand self-tribute, but it's clear now Flegel has lost his mind. How dare this foreigner, this savage rocket knight from a backward civilization board his ship? Driven to desperation, Flegel uses his overpowered doppelganger to bring pieces of the ship crashing around Sparkster. But our elite knight expertly dodges the debris and waits for his opening. He doesn't have to wait long, as the Flegel bot's midsection opens up to fire off a volley of plasma balls. Dodging the molten death, Sparkster delivers a series of precision mystic blade slashes until finally the robot is destroyed. In a panic, all the captain can do is flail and cry with a series of unfocused charges. But this, like every other tactic, fails as Sparkster defeats the captain and brings a close to Stage 4. But there's no time to spare. The Big Barone is falling apart. Thanks to the insane actions of Captain Flegel, Axel Gear punches a few commands in the control console and activates the escape pod, which conveniently turns out to be the cockpit of the Big Barone itself. However, Sparkster won't be left behind this time, as he uses one of the Big Barone's large front-mounted cannons to launch himself after the villain. In the distance, Sparkster can see the escape pod land in a distant tower amidst a sea of smog-choked buildings. Sparkster has made it to the heart of the Devotendos Empire. We're treated to a visual spectacle in this stage, much like the auto-scrolling level in Stage 1. Stage 5 has us rocketing towards the techno-palace of Emperor Devilgus. In the background, we see tightly clustered rows of smoke-belching industrial buildings and high-density housing. It's clear that the Empire is significantly more technologically advanced than the Zebulons, or at the very least more willing to employ technology. Lightning flashes as the Devotendos Empire launches a salvo of anti-air missiles at our hero, but the attacks fail to slow him down. Sparkster decides to fly low and fast above the surface. In my head, as a kid, I thought that this was a tactical move so that Sparkster could bypass the remaining anti-air measures. However, this allows the Empire to deploy a fast-moving piloted craft, the Pulsating Plasma Blaster. Poking around the Rocket Knight Adventure wiki, apparently the Pulsating Plasma Blaster, also known as the Surprise Core in Japan, is a reference to an enemy called the Big Core from another Konami franchise called Gradius. This walker enemy is capable of outrunning Sparkster's rocket pack while creating lines of projectiles. Even after Sparkster disables the legs, the Plasma Blaster is able to continue its pursuit, hovering just in front of our hero and using some sort of magnetic field to fling unspent artillery rounds like a whip. Destroying this craft causes the magnetic connection to fail, which creates this satisfying scattering of ammunition as Sparkster rockets ahead and finally breaches the palace of Emperor Devilgus. If the exterior of the palace was the Industrial Revolution, the interior of the palace is the Atomic Age. Cranking pistons, a strange gridwork of steel, blinking, whirling lights, and teleportation technology. And to top it off, Sparkster encounters an invincible enemy, aptly named in the manual as the Invincible Armored Pig. One attack from this menacing enemy is instant death for our hero. Sparkster's Mystic Blade doesn't even leave a scratch. Like many of the unstoppable forces presented in this game, the hero must use his wits when might fails. The tank enemy at the beginning of the game can be easily dispatched by flying behind him. The military train engine can be systematically dismantled, so there must be a way to destroy these untouchable pig robots. But for now, our hero opts to run. This particular area of the palace is tense, as each small section has a mini puzzle that doubles as a time attack. Any hesitation means death. It isn't until this portion that we're granted a means of destroying the pursuers via a conveniently placed vat of lava. I can't help but think this retractable bridge over a pit of lava isn't a reference to how a certain Italian plumber defeats a similarly invincible enemy. In keeping with the puzzle nature of the palace, Sparkster must navigate a treacherous elevator room that seeks to crush him, as well as utilize a series of mobility platforms to penetrate deeper into the increasingly alien palace. Until finally, we get to one of the most iconic sections of the game. Sparkster takes the final teleporter and finds himself face to face with Axel Gear, the traitor. Before Sparkster can react, Axel leaps backwards into an idling war machine. Sparkster's only option is to flee as Axel tries to crush the meddlesome hero. That's when Sparkster sees it, another piece of Devotendo's tech to hijack. See, I told you he would do it again. With a determined grimace, Sparkster activates the war pig and finally finds himself on equal footing with the traitor. I'm willing to wager that anyone who's played Rocket Knight Adventures and gotten this far into the game likely has a mixture of fond and frustrating memories of this fight. It's the frantic scramble to escape being crushed, the dire boss music, the new mechanics of controlling a gigantic playable robot, and the realization you can't simply button mash your way to victory. You have to approach Axel Gear carefully, sometimes waiting for him to attack, stepping back in a feint, then ducking forward and delivering a blow of your own. Mastering the war pig, Sparkster delivers a knockout attack, but Axel the Cur escapes. We haven't seen the last of him. In the next scene, Sparkster charges through Emperor Devilgus's throne room. The Emperor retreats with a cackle as our hero frees the princess. This is where we encounter another phase in the hero's journey. Princess Sherry, in my view, represents not just the obvious princess trope, but also that of the mystic woman. Usually the meeting with the mystic woman or the oracle or the witch happens earlier in the journey, usually at some point during the trial phase. But here we run into Princess Sherry as both the objective to be rescued as well as a boon to be granted. We learn that Princess Sherry was the key to the seal of the Pig Star and that she has adept usage of the supernatural. Suddenly the palace quakes as Devilgus makes his escape via a pig-shaped rocket. Using her powers, Sherry is able to empower Sparkster's rocket pack, granting it mystical propulsion to pursue the evil Emperor. The devil must be driven out. Before we continue, let's talk about two more symbols we've seen throughout the game, but haven't really talked much about. The first is the gem. These are the little red diamond-shaped items you pick up throughout the game and serve to increase your points. However, they also serve as a handy guide throughout the levels of Rocket Knight Adventure. Not sure how to climb a narrow pit? Try matching your rocket jump to angle of the gems. Not sure what path to take in the palace? Just follow the line of gems. And we've often talked about on this channel the negative symbolism of the color red, but here the positive symbolism is being used. Red is the color of love, but in the East it can also be the color of luck. I like to think the gems are mystically tied to the royal Zebulon line and that they serve as guideposts, perhaps created by Princess Sherry herself. Speaking of things connected to the royal line, I postulated earlier that the royal family might have been involved in some sort of maritime profession like fishing by virtue of their royal crest. But I also think either the royal family or perhaps the kingdom in general is involved in some sort of fruit trade. Opossums are omnivorous, so it's not beyond the realm of possibility that they grow and trade fruit as well as fish and eat fish. The in-game fruit itself serves as a health restorer, and fruit symbolism is found throughout various mythos, which it's a huge subject of discussion. It's something that I could probably make a whole nother video on its own. So we'll just kind of conveniently hand wave that for a later time. But to be brief about this, I think both the apple and banana symbolize vitality, since collecting them literally restores Sparkster's vitality. Speaking of Sparkster, let's rejoin our hero. When we catch up with Sparkster, we see that he's chased the Emperor into space. Princess Sherry's mystic powers must be incredibly potent, since not only was Sparkster able to escape Elhorn's gravity, but he seems to be unaffected by the vacuum of the void, at least for now. As our hero pursues his quarry, we immediately encounter resistance in the form of these robotic pig drones. If you look closely, all of their projectiles are apples, which I think is a reference to the tradition of placing an apple in a roasted pig's mouth. Doing a little bit of research behind this, apparently this keeps the pig's mouth from getting all twisted up and ugly looking while it's cooking and provides a nice aesthetic appeal. But here, the apple-shaped projectile is the weapon of choice. Also, another note here is that if you manage to kill a cluster of these robot pig head enemies, you're rewarded with a health power-up, which is another reference to Gradius, where killing a cluster of enemies often grants you some manner of bonus. And listen to that music. We started this game with these grand operatic fanfares, and now we've got these otherworldly tunes, almost like a permutation on the Doctor Who theme. As our hero negotiates through a tricky asteroid belt complete with hidden missile platforms, we encounter a strange gibbering space robot equipped with a shield. This enemy attempts to charge Sparkster, then backs up and fires a volley of laser beams. But Sparkster, using powerful close-range attacks, dispatches the strange enemy. Continuing onward, we encounter our next obstacle. It's Axel, clad in a large spacesuit equipped with a gigantic shoulder-mounted laser. Sparkster narrowly dodges being obliterated by the massive blast radius, all while fending off pig soldiers wearing their own battle-ready spacesuits. I think it's a nice piece of characterization that Axel doesn't care about the lives of his supposed allies here. If the pig soldiers manage to wander in to Axel's field of fire, the traitorous knight has no qualms about blasting them away if it means taking Sparkster out too. However, Sparkster manages to inflict enough damage on Axel's suit that he's forced to retreat. Our hero attempts to follow the traitor, but is suddenly blinded by a flash of red light. It's a battleship patrolling the outer orbit of Elhorn, and judging by the pig snout motif and pig soldier face decorating the ship, it belongs to none other than the Devotendos Empire. In this fight, I always feel obligated to try to destroy every gun, but somehow I botched destroying the rear-mounted one. It was very annoying. But anyway, much like the train battle, this boss must be destroyed piece by piece, starting with a dock that deploys small attack craft, followed by the front-mounted plasma gun crafted into the shape of a pig's jaw. Just as another side note, I never really thought about this before, but why would a spaceship need propellers? Maybe this battleship was originally intended to operate within the atmosphere of Elhorn and was somehow outfitted to work in space, but it just seems funny looking at those propellers now. In any event, the headpiece of the ship separates from the body and attempts to trap Sparkster in a pincer attack, but this risky maneuver exposes another of the battleship's vulnerable cores, which Sparkster takes full advantage of. As the bulk of the battleship explodes and disintegrates, we're still left with the front section, which systematically transforms into a porcine robot. This weapon fires row after arced row of apple projectiles, along with an obnoxious tracking laser before juggling its core around in the vacuum of space. I always took this strange behavior as a way for the robot to vent its overheated power supply. After enough damage is inflicted, the remainder of this battleship-turned-piggly robot is destroyed, clearing the way towards the final level. Sparkster approaches the ominous pig star, looming eerily in the abyss of space. We began this journey with a pig face glaring at us, and now we've come full circle, the cold metallic face of the pig star daring our hero to proceed. We find Sparkster entering what appears to be an observation platform of the pig star in search of the wicked Emperor Devilgus, but he doesn't have to wait long. Devilgus descends upon Sparkster, wasting no time firing plasma slashes from his scimitar. Devilgus is aggressive and surprisingly agile given how corpulent he is. Sparkster makes full use of his rocket pack to rebound off the strangely sturdy Emperor. If we look closely at Emperor Devilgus's design, he appears to be wearing an Eastern-inspired outfit, which fits with the Eastern Ottoman theme that the rest of the pig soldiers sport. Of particular interest is Devilgus's blue belt buckle, or what I thought for a long time was a blue belt buckle. If you look at the art in the manual, this actually appears to be some sort of bolt-on piece of tech or bionic implant. But after Sparkster delivers enough punishment, we find out that Emperor Devilgus is a robot. And he's not finished yet. After Devilgus pulls himself back together, he resumes the attack, hovering above the stage and making use of his cybernetic limbs to attempt to crush Sparkster. The combination of the faux flesh covering combined with the robotic exoskeleton feels like an unmistakable reference to the Terminator. But instead of a killer robot impersonating a man, this robot impersonated a world leader and subjugated an entire populace. The pig star carries echoes of Dr. Wily's factory from Mega Man 1. As our hero travels deeper into the facility, we see several Devilgus bodies in different build stages, similar to the various Gutsman robots being built by Wily. This revelation also begs the question, if Emperor Devilgus was a robot the whole time, who built the Emperor? Who deployed him to Elhorn? The answers will have to wait as Sparkster enters another section of the pig star. He senses a presence. It's him, the traitor, Axel Gear. No giant robots, no airship to escape into, no spacesuits, just Rocket Knight versus Rocket Knight. Their mystic blades clash, the arced slashes canceling each other out. Axel is more agile than Sparkster and appears to have a much more powerful rocket pack, or perhaps access to much more powerful techniques, which make me think he must have learned something from that book of secrets he attempted to steal from Mifune Sangular. But where Axel excels in technique, Sparkster can compensate with discipline and patience. After a few well-placed strikes, Axel becomes impatient. Powering up his rocket pack to the max, Axel destroys a portion of the hull. Sparkster takes a desperate grip on the framework to prevent from being sucked out into space. Again, Axel's superior rocket tech allows him to re-enter a depressurizing section of the pig star at will. What's more, Axel appears to be able to launch small missiles from his rocket pack in a bid to knock Sparkster out into the abyss. However, our hero maintains his calm, striking the traitor in between missile volleys until the reservoir holding all of this ammunition fails and all the missiles tumble impotently into space. Axel temporarily loses control, but quickly recovers. Now Axel resorts to countercharging Sparkster's rocket charges. Axel is fast, his tech is better, but he's blinded by ambition and impatience until finally, Axel's rocket pack fails for good. The scene turns gray as Axel is dramatically pulled out into the inky darkness of space. It's quiet now as an emergency evacuation teleport lowers from the ceiling. Sparkster has avenged his master, restored his order's honor, and vanquished the traitor to the darkness. All that's left is to find out who, or what, is responsible for all the Emperor Devilgus robots. Who was behind the scheme to invade the kingdom, kidnap Princess Sherry, and unseal the pig star. As Sparkster approaches the central sections of the facility, he comes across a series of gravity panels that allows him to jump many times higher than normal. He'll need to keep this in mind as he enters the final teleporter. Our hero arrives at the central chamber of the Pig Star, and to his horror, he sees the culprit behind everything. It's the core, the Pig Star core, the nexus of evil. It was behind everything. It built Emperor Devilgus, inhabited the Emperor's robotic shell, and attempted to find the key to its own jail cell. The evil of the Pig Star has been slowly leaking out, seeking to break the dam that contains it. Symbolically, the Pig Star represents a cosmic evil, driving those that gaze upon it mad, similar to some Lovecraftian god floating in uncaring space. However, unlike the indifferent and chaos incarnate gods of the Lovecraft pantheon, the Pig Star core knows exactly what it wants. It knows who and how to manipulate the Devotendosians, and it possesses the high technology to back it all up. Sparkster must put an end to this existential threat, not just to the kingdom of Zebulos, but perhaps to the entire planet of Elhorn itself. Dealing enough damage to the vulnerable red cooling rod that occasionally vents out the side of the core causes the Pig Star core to change its tactics. It uses a variety of weapons, hoop-shaped projectiles, beams of electricity, in combination with hovering and sometimes bouncing around the central chamber. Our hero stays calm, striking, dodging, slashing, ducking, until finally the core crashes to the ground. The resulting destruction of the core sets off a chain reaction. The Pig Star can no longer sustain itself. The evil animating force has been vanquished. Systems fail. Sparkster must escape. The powerful enchantment that allowed him to breathe in space seems to have faded, so Sparkster opts to take an escape pod. As the Pig Star begins to self-destruct, the sharp-eyed player will notice two streaks of light escaping the blast radius. One is undoubtedly Sparkster in the escape pod, but who is the other? We won't have to wait long to find out. As Sparkster plummets back to Elhorn, the insane remnants of the core appear. With endless manic laughter, it seeks one final attempt to kill the valiant knight that thwarted its plans. Sparkster is unable to attack the core directly, and it's all he can do to evade the desperate attacks. Things begin to heat up as the two combatants re-enter Elhorn's atmosphere. Luckily, Sparkster's escape pod is designed for this kind of thing. The exposed and heavily damaged remnants of the core is not. With one final grimacing laugh, the core disintegrates into oblivion. In the distance, we can see Sparkster's escape pod safely deploy its parachute. Sometime later, we get the second return of the hero's journey. Remember, the first return was Sparkster resuming his duties to protect the kingdom, but the second return, in my view, is much more literal. We join King Zebulos as he wardly paces the balcony of the castle. Sparkster, with mystic Princess Sherry in tow, makes his final return of the game, and of the journey as he lands softly nearby. The return phase of the journey is typically characterized by the hero incorporating the lessons he learned while working through his trials and battling evil. The father and daughter tearfully reunite, their long ordeal finally over. Sparkster, his duty complete, quietly backs away. It's time for him to return home as well. Not seeking any reward or acknowledgement, our hero blasts off into the wild blue. The royal bloodline of Zebulos looks on. The final phase of the hero's journey, sometimes referred to as the freedom to live, is represented by the hero's mastery over life and death. Although in this case, I think the meaning is conveyed more literally as Sparkster cruises freely through the open sky, his duty satisfied. And that's Rocket Knight Adventures. If you've never played this game, I highly recommend it. However, please play it on normal difficulty. Otherwise, you don't get to play that final boss fight. As a kid, the first time I beat the game on normal and saw what felt like this hidden section of gameplay, it actually made me realize I could never play games on easy again, because what if I missed something cool like this again? So it broke me of ever playing games on easy. So please, if you play this, play it on normal. You won't regret it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'm eager to hear what your thoughts are about the symbols in the game. I'm sure I probably missed some obvious mapping between the events of the game and the framework of the hero's journey. Please feel free to let me know in the comments, or if you just have a thought in general about game symbolism, or perhaps a suggestion as to what you would like to see covered next. I'm all ears. I read them all, which is easy for me to say at this point in the channel's growth. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.